to Easel Live. My name is Mo, I'm from Inventables, and this is one of those classes I know a lot of people have been talking about. And Easel Live, up until this point, we've done a lot of projects. We've tried to show you guys a lot of really interesting projects that you can make and walk you through the steps in doing that in Easel. Today's gonna be a little bit different because we are just gonna talk about bits. We're gonna try and cover everything that we possibly can about bits. That said, there's a lot to learn, and we're gonna try and tell you as much as we possibly can. But if you have questions, please leave them in the comments of this video. I know some of you guys are in the live chat right now, and that's awesome, but unfortunately the chat does disappear once the video is over. So if you could leave any of your questions in the comments, we'd love to get back with you as soon as we can, and that would be the best place to leave your questions. So we're gonna start at the very, very basics here with bits. And I'm also going to probably not get into Easel a whole lot. We might do a little bit of stuff in there just to show some time estimations and things like that. But it's really hard to convey a lot of the things that we're going to talk about. So my friend Michael here at Inventables, he helped me out. He took some awesome photos showing some different examples of what different bits look like on different materials. And we're going to use those to kind of teach you the best way to choose the particular bit that you're looking to use for your project. So with that in mind, some of you might be brand new to this and wondering, what are milling bits? And if you've heard of a drill, most people are familiar with drilling bits. They're what you use to hang up a picture or, on your house or something like that. Milling bits are different than drill bits in that they cut across the material, whereas drilling bits cut down through material. So the flutes and the design of the bit is totally different on a milling bit than it is on a drill bit. So if you're brand new to 3D carving, definitely use milling bits for your projects. Don't try to use drilling bits because it won't work. You'll end up just breaking bits like crazy. So it is important that you use milling bits because what you do with 3D carving is you cut across material, layer at a time, to reveal the shape that you want to reveal. A drill bit only goes straight down into the material, which doesn't really do you a lot of good when you're trying to make a project with a 3D carver. So there are three primary different types of materials that are used to make bits. And I'll get on our site here and I'll just show you some of the examples. And I'm just gonna do a lot of stuff in our store today just so you guys can get a sense of where to find these things on our site. You can see better pictures on our site as well of all the different things. So let me go ahead and visit our site really quick. And I'll just show you where you can find some of this stuff. So here I am, I'm on the main bit part of our site. You can just do that from going to carving bits up here at the top and selecting the carving bits from the drop down. And you can see over here we've got a bunch of different types. We've got the type of bit, we've got shank diameter, cutting material, etc. And what we're going to talk about first is the material that the bits are made out of. So the cheapest kind of bit that you can buy, which is typically used in hand routing, is called steel. So what you probably would see would be either an HSS bit, and the HSS stands for high speed steel. Now these milling bits were primarily used for hand routing. So if you use a hand router, these are usually the type of bits you would get for that. They have a really tough body because they are made out of steel. And they also have incredibly sharp cutting edges on their flutes. So that makes them really great for hand routing. And they're a little more forgiving than a carbide bit, which will be the bit we talk about next. So steel bits are a really good choice if you're a beginner. So if you're just kind of getting started, I would look at getting some steel bits because they're not quite as fragile as a carbide bit. And they're a pretty good price point too for the bits instead of paying a lot for a carbide bit. So the second kind of bit that we have are solid carbide bits. So carbide bits are made entirely out of carbide, and most bits that you find for 3D carving are made out of carbide. And it's an incredibly hard material. So if you're looking for a bit with a really high rigidity, I would look at a solid carbide bit. These bits are a little more expensive, but it's definitely something that's worth the price point if you're past that beginning stage and you're starting to use your bits a little more and you understand how your machine works. Solid carbide is a great way to go because for the price point, you're going to get a really high rigidity and a really long tool life. So solid carbide bits, most 3D carving bits are carbide, and That's because of the long tool life and then also the rigidity of them. So they're a great option, but again, because of the price point, if you're still in those learning stages, I would stick with the steel, or I would stick with carbide tipped. So carbide tipped is a hybrid bit between a high-speed steel body and a carbide tip on the end. So the body of the bit is made out of steel, and then the tip of the bit is made out of carbide. So this is great because you get the toughness of the steel body. So you've got that really tough bit body that you would get on a steel bit, but you get the wear resistance of the carbide on the tip of the bit. So you've still got that long tool life on the tip of the bit, but the price point's a little bit lower because the body is made of steel. So those are sort of the basics. The 3 types of materials you'll often find bits made out of are going to be steel or high-speed steel, which sometimes is abbreviated HSS, solid carbide, and then the hybrid bit, which is carbide tipped, which has the steel body and the carbide tip on the end of the bit. So the other thing that's important to consider, and I'm just gonna pull this up real quick. So what I'm gonna do as I'm walking through these, I'm gonna kind of start with the basics, and we're just gonna move our way down to the end of the bit and just kind of talk about the different traits of the bit as we go. So now that you know what kind of body of a bit you might want to use based on your carving abilities and sort of your level as a 3D carver, the next thing to consider are how many flutes you have on your bit. So I'm just going to use this here. If you've got a bit that has 1 or 2 flutes, so what are flutes? Maybe let me back up just a little bit. So flutes are the cutting edges on the bit. So when you look at a bit, you can see that it has those cutting edges that are super sharp. Be careful. I've cut myself a few times trying to play around with bits. So the cutting edge is what we call the flute. And you'll see when you look at on our site, there are so many different shapes of flutes out there, and a lot of bits have different number of flutes. So you could see anywhere between 1 to 4 is usually typical. I'd say most bits fall in that 2 to 4 range. And the number of flutes on a bit determines the chip load. The chip load is how quickly material is removed from your stock. So if you have a really high chip load, that means you're removing a lot of chips from the stock material in like small quantities, but frequently. And if you have a low chip load, that means you're removing larger chips, so like larger chunks of chips, but maybe at a slower rate. So a flute that has 1 flute, you can see even though this is kind of twisted, the twisting is actually just the type of bit, but it does only have that 1 cutting edge that sort of spirals around the body of the flute, or the body of the bit. And if you've got a 1 or 2 flute bit, you're going to be removing a lot more material with each rotation of the bit. So the 1 to 2 flute bits have really fast, they're really fast bits, and they tend to have a rougher cut to them just because of how much material is being churned out. So it basically is allowing there to be more room to eject the chip further away from the bit, which is why if you are doing anything with a plastic or some kind of material that might re-weld onto itself, I would definitely stick with a 1 or 2 flute bit. So what would be an example of that? So I would say, like this site says right here, soft plastics are a great choice for a 1 to 2 flute bit, and especially an upcut bit because it's going to pull the chips up and away from the material that you're carving. We'll get to that in a second. But for now, let's just keep in mind that if you're using a bit that has 1 to 2 flutes, you're going to get a faster carve, but you're also probably going to get a rougher carve because of how much material is being ejected with each rotation of the bit. So if we go back here, and I'll go back to my handy dandy little sheet down here. So let's say you've got more than 2 flutes. Let's say you've got like 3 or 4 flutes. So what would that be good for? So if you've got more than 2 flutes, or 2 flutes or more, I would say, you're going to be ejecting less material with each rotation, but you're still going to be like sort of constantly removing material a little bit each time. So a smaller chip load, but you've got a lot finer chips that are being ejected from the material that you're carving. So this results in a really smooth surface finish. So you can think of this as because you're just kind of chiseling away at it a little at a time, you're not going to get that tear out that you might get if you were using a single flute bit. So because these remove smaller amounts of material at a high frequency, I would say these are really great on harder materials. So think corian would be a great example of this, or even hardwoods. I would definitely stick to using a higher flute bit if you're carving something in hardwood, just to make sure you keep that smooth surface finish at the top of your material. So kind of just going back to our flutes, it's a quick little overview. If you're using something with 1 to 2 flutes, I would stick to using those on soft plastics or something that might melt. So HDPE or acrylics are great choices for 1 or 2 flute material, or 1 or 2 flute bits. And then also, if you're using more than 2 bits, like 2, 3, or 4 bits, keep those in mind for soft surface finishes like corian or hardwood, basically a harder material where you'd want to minimize the amount of tear out that might take place on the top surface of your material. So again, I know we're going through a lot, guys, so if you do have questions, feel free to leave those in the comment section of the video, and we will definitely cover as much as we possibly can. All right, so moving on. There are, as you've probably seen on our site, you might be seeing these words like upcut or downcut or V-carve and all these different things. And there are definitely differences in those flute types. So the flute type determines the direction the chips are going to be dispersed when the bit removes chips from the stock material. So let's start with, so you can kind of see over here with the types. The types here varies between both the flute type and then also the end of the bit type. So we're going to start by talking about upcut bits, since they're most commonly used. And upcut bits would pair well with the types of materials that you're looking to carve with a 1 or 2 flute option. So that might be something to keep in mind, is if you're going to be using an upcut bit, it's oftentimes a similar material that you would be using with a 1 or 2 flute bit. So this is probably one of our most popular bits that we sell. It is solid carbide, so it is a good long life for this bit, especially at this cutting diameter and shank diameter. 1/8 inches is a good like middle ground, I would say, for a cutting bit diameter. We can talk about that a little bit later too. So upcut bits, when they turn, they eject the chips up and away from the cutting flutes. So what it does is it will take those chips that are being dispersed and it will remove them up and away from the material that you're cutting. So why is this important? Well, if you've ever carved HDPE or you've ever carved acrylic and you've used a bit that doesn't have an upcut on it, you've probably experienced a little bit of melt. And let me show you really quickly what that looks like. I'm gonna have to share this window with you guys real quick. Let me pull that up. All right, so let's look at this. So this is an example of some of those photos that my friend Michael took for us. And you can see here the difference between cutting with a straight cut flute, an upcut flute, and a downcut flute. So first of all, straight cut and acrylic, I would not recommend, because as you can see here, it just got all kinds of crazy because it was basically, it just wasn't, it wasn't working correctly because the machine just couldn't handle the chip load and it caused the carving to get off path. So straight cut, not recommended for acrylic. But look at the difference here between the upcut and the downcut. So the upcut, you can see there's a nice smooth finish on the top here, and it's pushed these chips away nice and quickly, whereas the downcut, you've gotten a lot of re-welding. So basically, as the downcut cuts, it is pushing the material back into the surface, and that's causing this material to get really hot as it cuts, and then when the bit passes, that material just sits there and remelds into the path. So you can see that is not what you want. You can see it here as well with these pockets. So the remelding is taking place here with that downcut, but the upcut is lifting it up and away. So for upcuts, I would definitely recommend using upcuts on any kind of plastic that might remelt. So acrylic is a great example. Another great example would be HDPE. If you're using our HDPE mosaic tiles or something like that, I would stick with using an upcut for that too. So you can kind of just lift those chips up and away. So that was upcut. Downcut does the opposite of an upcut. So rather than push the chips up and away, it pushes the bits back, or the chips back into the material. So why would that be useful? Well, if you've ever created a pocket, say for an inlay or something, and you're using a nice hardwood or a plywood or something, the downcut bit keeps the surface of your material nice and smooth. So it doesn't have like that fringy stuff at the top of the wood that you might get if you use an upcut. So by pushing the chips back down into the material, it allows the surface of your material to stay nice and smooth, and you get a really good pocket with those kinds of things. The only downside to a downcut is that as the downcut cuts through a piece of material, you might experience some of that tear out along the bottom surface of your material. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind, is an upcut will leave a smooth surface at the bottom of a material if you're cutting all the way through, and a rough surface at the top of the material, whereas a downcut will leave a smooth surface at the top of the material, but a rough surface at the bottom of the material. I told you we were going to be covering a lot of ground today, guys. So don't worry, we are going to have all this information available to you in our support center very, very soon. So if it's a lot to take in right now, totally understand. But I just want to try and cover these basics while we can. So upcut, downcut. Another one to talk about is a straight cut flute. So a straight cut doesn't expel the chips up or down. Let me see if I can pull up while I've got it here. Let me pull this up to share with you guys so we can see what we're talking about with straight flutes. All right, so this is an example that I did with HDPE, just to show you guys some of the examples. So you can see the downcut, we kind of got these little wiggly lines here, and that's because you know, there was a little bit of remelding that was taking place, and it wasn't really giving us a super fine finish because the material was getting so hot. The upcut worked pretty well too, but you can see there is a little bit of fringe that results on the top of the material. But for the most part, it did do better than a downcut in terms of keeping the material clear away from the surface. But the straight cut does the best job with doing this because it doesn't pull the material up. It simply disperses it and pushes it away from the cutting area. So it minimizes that sort of chipping and fraying that you might see on other types of materials. And it's just kind of a good general purpose bit. If you're using any kind of a material that might splinter or flake, I would stick with a straight cut bit because it doesn't pull the material up, so you're not gonna get that tear out. So another good example would be plywoods are great for straight cut bits, or bamboo is also great for straight cut bits because you're not messing with the layering of those plies. You don't have to deal with trying to you know, get the plies to cooperate correctly with you. So for plywoods, or bamboo is a great example too, or even HDPE, I would stick with using a straight cut just to kind of keep those chips away without pulling or pushing on the material. It just keeps it exactly where it's at. And I'll show you really quickly. We can go to our store and I can show you some of the different straight cut options we have, just so you can see what those blades look like compared to the upcut and the downcut. Oh, actually, you know what, while we're in here, we didn't really cover downcut, so let's pull those up. So you can see how different the downcut bit looks from the upcut. So, you know, you see how the blade kind of spirals downwards. That's really important. Let's see if I pull this up. I can pull up the upcut just to kind of show you a comparison. So here we go. You can see that the blade here, the flute is sort of spiraling upwards, and on the downcut bit, it's spiraling downwards. One way you can do this, if you're trying to figure out what kind of bit you have, you know, let's say you don't have these colored rings on your bit, One way you can tell is if you roll the bit along a surface of like a table or something. You can tell which way this bit is spinning and if these blades are rotating downwards or upwards. Now you got to keep in mind, you got to roll it in the same direction that your router works. So just, keep that in mind when you're doing that. And then let's see, I think, yeah, so here's a good example of a straight cut bit. You can see there's no curling or spiraling on this at all. It's just gonna cut that material and get it away. So if you've got a project where you need something to be smooth on both the top and the bottom of the surface, you might think like, how do I make a decision there? Well, the great thing is there are these bits called compression bits that combine an upcut motion and a downcut motion. So this is one of the craziest looking flutes that you are probably gonna see on some milling bits. And what's great about this is that the bottom part of the bit pulls the material up and away, and the top part of the bit pushes the material down. So as you're cutting through a piece of wood, let's say, the upcut bit is going to be dispersing those chips up and away from the cutting surface. And then as it cuts through the material, this downcut bit is going to kind of come through and finish off the surface of the surface of the material, so you still get the effect of the smoother surface at the top of the cutting edge, or the top of your material, with the downcut part, and then the upcut part, again, clears those chips up and away. So if you were doing any kind of a through cut, the compression bits are a great choice because it leaves a good finish on the top with the downcut part, and it also leaves a nice finish on the bottom because of the upcut part cutting through the material first. These are also good on laminated materials because it leaves that smooth surface finish as well. But it also doesn't quite cause the re-welding that a downcut bit might have. All right, so there's a few other things I want to talk to you today. And what we're going to talk about is the end of the bit. So this is important based on a lot of different kinds of bits that you might have. So let's start first with the fishtail bits. And I'm trying to see, I know we've got some in here. Let's see, okay, yeah, so upcuts are a good example of the fishtail. So fishtail bits, you can see it kind of has this little curvature on it right up here. So it kind of looks like the end of a fishtail. And what that does is it allows you to create a pocket with a nice clean edge and a flat bottom. So because the way this cuts, it makes sure that the edge of the tool path is always level with the parts of the material that you're cutting. So fishtails are really versatile for a lot of different materials, and that bottom sort of swooping motion is going to give you a nice flat bottom of a pocket. So if you're using an inlay, a fishtail is a good way to go. You could also use a straight edge because that does the same thing. It has sort of a flat bottom on the end of the bit, which will just give you a nice clean pocket. Fishtails are also really good for thinner materials. So that's something to keep in mind if you're working with a really thin material. You can get a clean edge if you're cutting through like a 16th inch or an 1/8 inch piece of material. The next one I want to talk about is a ball nose bit. And we don't have too many of these. It's not something we've talked about much in Easel Live. A ball end mill has a rounded end on it that will create sort of contouring of your tool path. So if you're doing something that has any kind of a 3D modeling, let's say you're making like a dome or like a curved surface on your material, the ball nose end is great because as you're cutting away layers in a lot of steps, it's going to reduce the risk of leaving a jagged stepping on your material. So you'll get a nice smooth finish as that rounded part carves the material down. The one thing to keep in mind with this, I've used ball end mills a few times, and it is important to change your step over so that you don't end up with sort of a rippled groove in your material. So step over is the distance between, or the step over is the overlap of your tool paths. So one way to think of this is, let's say you're mowing a lawn, right? This is like the best example I can think of with step over. So let's say you're mowing a lawn, and if you're like me and you want to get your lawn done as quickly as possible, you probably don't overlap the rows very well. And so there's going to be like that little strip of grass that sort of lingers in there, and then you look at it and you're like, oh crap, I gotta like go and like mow that over too. So if you have like a really high step over, that means that your tool paths are farther apart. And if you have a high step over, that means you overlap. So if you are one of those like people who loves their lawn looking super pristine, you might really overlap your mowing on your lawnmower to make sure that you don't miss any blades of grass that might slip through between the rows of the lawnmower. So a lower step over is going to basically tell your machine, overlap my tool paths so that I get a nice finished surface between them. So in Easel, most of the step over settings that you're gonna see are gonna be in like that 30 to 40% range, which is enough coverage that you can still get a smooth pocket with a fishtail or with a straight end bit. And then if you're using a contour, I would stick with using a much lower step over, like maybe 10 or 20%, to make sure that you don't get that kind of rigid rippling that can come from ball end mills. There's two other bits that I want to talk about today. I don't want to get into too much detail, but I'm sure somebody probably has questions about them. We do sell them on our site, so I do want to talk about them. And those are going to be the V-bits and engraving bits. So V-bits are what you can use to kind of get like a V groove in your surface or in your material. And you might see this in a lot of sign making applications. And because the bit has that V groove, it leaves sort of a beveled edge as you cut. So if you're familiar with different V carving software, these would be the bits you would use to kind of get those beveled edges and that tapering. It's not something that Easel has available in it, but it is possible to use outside software to do those kinds of carves in Easel. And I'll just show you what those look like, since maybe some of you aren't familiar with them. Just cover that real quick. So if you're looking at V-bits, they have kind of this really interesting end on them. You can see it doesn't look like any of the bits that we've talked about so far. It's got like this nice little V groove, and the degree of the V-bit determines how fine of detail you're going to get. So a 90-degree bit is going to have less detail than a 60-degree bit. So the higher the degree, the less detail. The lower the degree, the more detail. I would not recommend using V-bits on plywood because you're probably going to get a little bit of tear out. You can certainly use them in test jobs, but they're really for professional hardwood type of things. So the reason I wanted to talk about V-bits really quickly is because we also sell engraving bits on our site. Now, engraving bits, in theory, is essentially just a very low angle V-bit. You can see this, it's not really qualified as a V-bit, but it does have a V shape to it. And we sell these because you can use engraving bits through Easel. You can just plug in the cutting diameter as the cutting diameter of your bit. So when you go in here, you can just type in here that your cutting diameter for your engraving bit is like 0.01. So that's how you can set an engraving bit up in Easel. And because, where'd it go? Oh, wait, there it is. So the engraving bit, use the cutting diameter here to set that number in Easel when you are setting up your bit. And engraving bits are really, really precise. So incredibly precise detail you can get with these. I mean, look at the tip on this thing. So if you're doing a really fine engraving or something really small that needs a name added to it or something like that, these are excellent choices for that. Now, engraving bits are not great choices for every application though. I mean, if you look at that bit tip there, those are incredibly fragile. So I would not recommend using an engraving bit for anything other than engraving. So if you're trying to cut something out and you need it to be really, really thin, I wouldn't use an engraving bit for that because it's really not cut out for that kind of through cut. It's really designed to just engrave the surface of a material, not very deeply. Also remember that the deeper you go with a V-bit, the wider your path is going to be. So if you're just using the very tip of the bit, then that's great. But if you're carving down, you know, let's say like an 1/8 inch or something, your whole tool path is gonna end up being this wide. So that's something to keep in mind when you are using engraving bits, is that if you enter this as the diameter, you gotta remember that this is also still a factor in making your path. The other thing I want to add about engraving bits is I would really stick to using them for woods only, maybe some plastics, but I wouldn't use an engraving bit on acrylic just because acrylic is such a hard material for a bit this very thin and fragile to carve that you are going to be breaking these little things like you wouldn't believe. So definitely stick to woods for engraving bits, and just keep in mind that as you carve deeper with an engraving bit, again, you never want to carve so you're like this deep with an engraving bit. Just try to stay in this top level so that you minimize the breaking on that. So that really covers everything that we wanted to show you guys today in terms of different kinds of bits. I know there's a lot more bit knowledge out there. We're probably going to do a second volume of bit knowledge just to kind of cover everything that's missing. If you guys have anything you want to add, please do share that in the comments of this video. Like I said, we'll get back to you as quickly as possible, and it'll help us understand what else you guys want to learn about bits. So before we go, I want to show you guys just a few examples, like I was saying, of the different materials and the different bits that we use to carve them. So give me 1 second. I'm just going to pull all these up really quickly so that I can share them with you guys. And we can go through these one at a time and kind of talk about why the bits, I mean, you'll be able to see pretty quickly like what bits are good for what applications. So let me go ahead and I'll start sharing these different things with you. So we're going to start with Baltic birch plywood. And you can see pretty quickly why an upcut bit is not something you would want to use for plywood. I mean, look at this tear out. That's crazy. So basically it's shredding the material, and it's just letting it linger along the cut path, because all that upcut bit is doing is just pulling it up and away from the pocket. You can see even here you got quite a bit of fringe, which is not so great. On the other hand, look at the clean finish with this downcut bit. So on this downcut, you've got a really beautiful surface. It doesn't cause that splintering or that tear out that you get with the upcut, and it's got a great finish in the bottom of the pocket, and then also here and doing just a cutout as well. The straight cut, you can see, not going to be as clean as a downcut, but I can tell you from experience, because I was the one who carved these out, the straight cut bit is so much faster than a downcut. So even though you still have a little bit of finishing you'll need to do with this when it's all done, you're still going to end up with just a fine product as opposed to something like this. And same here, you can see it's just going to be very minimal carving or sanding with a straight cut bit, but your project is going to get done so much faster if you use a straight cut on plywood, because it doesn't cause the splintering of an upcut, and it can get through a lot more material a lot quicker than a downcut bit. So you can see for plywoods, downcuts and straight cuts are excellent choices. Upcut, not so much. All right, so let's pull up the next one, and we can see what that one looks like. Acrylic. So aside from the fact that acrylic is not spelled correctly at the top of this, bear with us. We tried to get these done real fast for you guys. It will be changed when we get it up on our site. So it's pretty easy to see from acrylic what the best choice is here. Upcut, single flute, all the way, go for it. You're gonna get a really clean edge along here. You can see there's a little bit of fraying on the pocket, but it's not bad at all. The downcut, serious rewelding, a lot of melt. The material is just getting turned back into the acrylic, getting all hot, and then solidifying again. The straight cut just cannot handle the speed of the acrylic. It's such a hard material that the machine, especially in this case, I did these all on a Carvey, it just cannot deal with what is going on. So if you're experiencing something like what you're seeing over here with the straight cut, your speeds and feeds might be a little bit too aggressive for the material, or it could be that the bit is just really not designed to be used with that kind of material. So for something like this, acrylic, I would stick with upcuts all the way. So that's that one. And I've got a few more to show you guys. Hopefully this is interesting. I have no idea. Hardwoods. So a little bit different than the plywood. And you can see here, again, you know, straight cut does pretty well, but you've still got a little bit of fraying, a little bit of chipping. The upcut leaves a terrible surface finish as it tries to pull that away. But the downcut is, you know, hands down the best choice for a hardwood. You can see the pocket is nice and smooth. The edges are nice and smooth. You don't get any of this tear out that's going to result in like a poor inlay. But the pocket for this inlay would be precise and very clean. And the cutout as well would be a really great finish. For these, they did have all these bits. The straight cut had a single flute. The downcut and upcut had 2 flutes. So you can see how using those higher flutes also helped with these cleaner finishes as well. So lastly, not lastly, we have 2 more. Sorry, I hope that's okay. This one is going to be the HDPE. A lot of classrooms do use the HDPE material, so we just wanted to cover that and show that to you. If you're using these, the HDPE, super cheap material, really easy to carve. Again, the downcut does leave those little bit of rippling and fraying, a little bit more melt. The upcut leaves a good finish. You just need to do very minimal sanding with the upcut bit since it does leave a little bit of that fringe at the top. But the straight cut, this was a single flute straight cut bit that we used on this, and you can see it does a great job of clearing the material out quickly. There's no melt, there's no fraying, and it's a super fast carve too, to use a single flute straight cut on HDPE. So there's a good example of the HDPE. And then since I had a little bit extra time in my hand and there happened to be a piece of this laying around, I did a piece of expanded PVC. It is another very cheap material, very useful for prototyping. So if you're looking for a way to get started with carving or just kind of like fumble through some ideas that you might have for a project, expanded PVC is a great testing product, a great testing material. And you can see here that upcut is an easy choice for this as well. So with a straight cut, you're going to get a lot of fraying, a lot of chipping because it's another one of those materials that really needs to be dispersed away from what you're cutting. And you can see like the pocket here is like rough and nasty and gross, and like that's not really going to be good for anything. And this is just, you know, really gunked up. Same with the downcut. It does result in a little bit more melt and kind of that fraying that you see because the material is kind of getting gunked up in the bit and just sort of re-melding back to the stock material. But the upcut is a great choice because it gets that material cleaned out quickly. The pocket is nice and smooth. You can see the edges are all nice and smooth, so the machine isn't being overtaxed and just kind of leaves a great finishing on it. So if you're looking for a cheap material to kind of play around with and get started, expanded PVC is a great way to go to just sort of learn about your machine and do some prototyping for some different things. Woo! Okay, I just talked a lot. I hope that this was useful to some people. I know some of you are at different stages in your 3D carving journey. Some of you are just getting started. If that's the case, I apologize if you're gonna like have traumatic stress after this episode of Easel Live. This is not how we normally do things, but we were curious to see if a more strictly educational Easel Live is gonna be something that people want to see or not. So there's a lot of information here. There is currently a support article on our website called Choosing Your Milling Bit that talks through the different definitions that we've approached. So flutes, number of flutes, material type of bit, that is currently on our support center. We are going to get those images up on our support center as well so that you can reference those when you're trying to choose between, you know, should I use a depth cut or a down cut if I'm cutting acrylic? Hopefully you know the answer to that now. So those will be there for visual resources so that you can easily see a quick example of what it might look like when you complete a carve with that bit and that material. So just like a good reference, we are gonna hopefully get that populated with more materials so that you can see like, okay, this is what Corian looks like, or, you know, this is what some other materials like linoleum might look like with the different types of bit. And then we'll also try to use some other bits as well in there. But we wanted to start with the straight cut, the upcut, and the downcut as just a general overview. Those are really basic, simple types that you're going to use at any stage in your carving journey. If you have any questions about anything that we've covered, please feel free to leave a comment in this video. Again, if you're on the live chat right now, that chat does disappear after the video is over, so we won't be able to see your question if you leave it there. So please add it in the comments below the video, and we will get to those as quickly as we possibly can. We also are really interested in learning more about what you guys want to see us do here at Easel Live. Do you really like the projects? Do you really like stuff like this where it's just educational and we talk through some things? Please share with us. We really want to give you guys the best resources you possibly can have to continue creating the things that you want to make. So that's it for me. I'm ready for the weekend. I don't know about you guys. If you have any questions, you can also reach us at help@inventables.com. Be happy to help you with anything that you have. And again, my name is Mo. I really thank you guys for joining me here at Easel Live, and I hope to hear from you soon. Thanks.